Well, cool. We thank you all for coming. We do have one more panelist that we're expecting. We had one cancel, so but right now it's just Nick and I, and also Nick's Twitch stream, which is we welcome all of you as well. As Wayne said, I'm Eric. This is Nick. We're gonna sort of talk about careers in sports analytics and the various avenues that folks can go under. Nick and I have an interesting experience that we've had, I don't know. So personally, my job is just to sort of lay that out there. At PFF, I run research and development on the consumer side of that business. So I have a team of data scientists. So for the folks in data science, those are folks that will build algorithms and code that will take data sets and build predictive models off of them. I also oversee subject matter experts. So for example, we have somebody in my group who is an expert at the salary cap. And so his task is to do research and to sort of build up the content knowledge that we have to build models, but have the data scientists build models for the salary cap. And then I also oversee some of our broadcast responsibilities, namely Sunday Night Football. So whatever you saw last night with the Rams and the Bills. And then I oversee, for example, the broadcast for NBC's broadcast of Notre Dame football. So I have somebody who's actually sitting next to the play-by-play person, giving them statistics and things like that throughout the broadcast. So while my experience, I have PhD in math. I was a math professor before. I can corroborate Wayne in saying that the pay there maybe isn't quite the same as a data scientist, but I taught for 6 years, and then I came on PFF in various roles. And so that's my experience, but also the experience of managing folks who might be a lot like you. I've heard when folks were entering in, there's business admin, there's journalism, there's things like that are certainly folks that I've interacted with in my career as well. So.
Yeah, I'm Nick. I'm the director of baseball analytics at the Cincinnati Reds. Unlike stuff that Eric gets to do, which is a lot of public-facing stuff, as well as a lot of teams have PFF data too. My stuff is all based around our team, specific to the Reds. So everything from predictive modeling and player projections, all the way to the shift, whether or not we do it, and everything in between. So communicating with coaches, trying to understand their needs, trying to create the best products for them. Also communicating with the front office, so being a part of the decision-making group there, and trading away people's favorite players. For the most part, it's a lot of management of analytics, whether people are getting enough analytics, whether we're underserving certain projects, managing resources of handling keyboards, people, so data scientists or analysts, what they need to do to finish projects, and then ultimately, is that serving the right purpose? So. Are coaches getting what they need? Are players getting what they need? Are we ultimately developing, the best players we can? So, so that's a lot of. And then I also have this weird stream that does anyone here follow the stream? Yeah. Okay. So there's.
So Nick's being modest. He has a Twitch stream where he live codes, and people will come on and watch, Nick do various projects in data science. But what have been the sports that you've done? You've done bull riding, right?
Yeah. So
football.
Yeah.
Well, you don't do baseball, obviously, because that's kind of your.
When I was at KFC and I no longer was working for the Reds, I was doing some baseball stuff. So that did exist for a hot second. But yeah, on the stream we do live coding, so we do. That's right. Shout out to KFC. So we've done bull riding, we've done esports, we've done basketball, we've done football. We do mostly like NFL stuff now just because the data is so easy to grab.
Right.
But yeah, we do a bunch of stuff. And then it's like me coding, so it's like kind of nice because I don't code too much anymore as a director. Kind of, never mind.
Yeah, no, that's actually like that's a fairly like common like exasperation for people who end up in management roles, right? That you end up doing less of the thing that got you into management in the first place. I think like for the structure of this, what we want to do is for the brave souls that want to ask a question from the crowd, we will sort of open up the floor to that. We do have preset questions, both that we've gotten beforehand, but also through the chat in Nick's stream. So since you guys all came out here, I want to give that preference. So if anybody has a question, please just raise your hand and Nick and I will call on you. Okay, right away.
How did you end up working for PFF? What was the path to getting there?
Right. So, and I think this is very prescriptive, actually. So, I was just working my regular job. My research area was in mathematical biology, so I was like building metrics that were going to the Environmental Protection Agency and like things like that. And I kind of like was PFF was really new, and they were offering out positions to people just to like watch games and chart data and get paid for it. And like my wife was like, look, you already watch football all day on Sunday. You might as well get paid for it. So I answered the call. And interestingly, it was a very like intensive job. Like I was legitimately like marking down where players were and what they were doing. And then I begged the editor at PFF to let me write an article. And I remember like in October of 2015 was when I was doing that part-time. I was on the way to a math conference where I was like one of the speakers, and I was more excited that this dinky little blog called ProFootballFocus.com was publishing an article that I wrote about free agents or something like that than I was about this opportunity. And ultimately what happened is I continued to write, I continued to say stupid stuff on the internet, and eventually I got better at not saying stupid stuff. And then eventually PFF needed data scientists. And so they hired myself and my colleague George Shahuri to run data science in 2018. So it took 2015 to 18 of me doing part-time work for them, kind of like low pay work for them on the side, to eventually building a data science group there. And I think Nick, you have like kind of an interesting sort of story about that at KFC, right? Where that's that company's obviously longer known, but they didn't have data science before you started. So it was kind of similar in that they were looking for somebody to be to start that, right?
Yeah, like so 2017 I got to the Reds. 2020 I left the Reds to go start the data science department at KFC, and like that company had no data science department. They had like young brands who had a handful of data scientists to help like on bigger business proposal stuff, but there was no one like doing menu optimization or like target marketing ads for like specific demographics or something. So coming in for that was, I don't know. It's different when it's like a gigantic company that's already going versus like a company that's like kind of starting up and then realizing that that's going to be an important piece going forward.
Yeah, right. Like, so, and for you guys, for your careers, you're going to have a situation where oftentimes where you have to choose between going with an established company where your data, like, so it's kind of this way in baseball, right? And a lot of organizations, sports analytics, like if you go and work for an NHL team, you might be the only data scientist starting out there. And so you might have to do everything. You might have to do data engineering. You might have to do report building. You might have to do kind of everything from A to Z. And then if you go to a baseball team, like, you might only do the draft model, or you might only do, player development, or only do visualizations for players. And like that, you could be very confined in that role. You might be able to do kind of, so like PFF right now, we have, probably about 10 people who kind of are data science or data science adjacent. So folks at our company don't have to do quite as much of everything anymore. They can like focus on certain things, and that's great. It just depends upon what suits you, I think.
Next one. Questions? Yeah.
So, like, how do you balance like the human element against analytics? Does that make sense?
How do you balance the human element against analytics? So, I suppose the easiest like example of that in baseball is like scouting versus analytics. There's like you send a scout out, they evaluate someone's performance. From that performance, that scout's supposed to also be able to predict or project how a player's going to do when they reach the big leagues. So really, that still is data, right? So a lot of the time, you can take what a scout says, quantify it in some way, whether it's like they're grading, like they're scouting on some sort of grading scale, like PFF has like scouting grades or some sort of like grading scale. And it's a shit ton of pizza. That's so much pizza.
I think we'll just say it. So we might like let's finish answering, then we can and then break for pizza or whatever, then come back.
But by the way, thanks for the raid. Where I'm like in a dog. Look at this. This is crazy. Look at this dog. This is crazy.
Yeah.
I'm live.
Yeah, I mean, so to answer, like, I think that the hard part, like, for somebody like me, I'm never going to know what Bill Belichick knows. Like, he probably has in his brain, like, 110% of what I've codified in my life as a football analyst, right? And so the thing that I think you want to do is the analytics part is never going to go away. Like we're moving towards efficiency and that kind of thing. What you want to be able to do as an analytics person is build systems so that really smart subject matter experts can do less of the grindy work and more of the thing that they're truly brilliant at. And sort of like kind of allow for the human element to shine in situations where you can't codify it. And over time, that makes it harder on subject matter experts because you're like the cream sort of, it does whittle down probably the number of people who are subject matter experts. However, it makes that job, I think, more appealing to be one of those people. So like, for example, us at PFF, like if you were a running backs coach historically and you wanted to find out how many times, like you wanted to look at all the plays where your running back picked up a linebacker in a blitz. Like you used to have to watch every single game and tag, and like you had to watch the whole game to find the 5 plays that they did that, right? And now you have PFF, and you guys have this in baseball as well, where like you basically can actually go and log into a system, find those 5 plays. It takes you 2 seconds to do that. And then from there, you can scout that play and use your subject matter expertise to better scout those plays as opposed to wasting hours just finding those plays in the first place, right? So that is where like they're complementary. Now, they are going to be in opposition at times when, somebody says, for example, like, we need to sign this running back because he's got that dog in him. And I'm like, well, he actually averages 2.4 yards a carry after contact, which is not very good. And there's going to be conflict, right? But honestly, like, some of the great insights that I've generated is like talking with people who don't know any analytics, and they're like, hey, this is what I look for. And I'm like, shoot, I can go into the data and actually try to untangle what that is. And then that way, I can like filter out players, for example, and that coach doesn't have to waste all the time filtering out those players for the traits that they're looking for.
Yeah. So, but that does bring like an interesting like thing you mentioned about when we are trying to quantify or codify like the human element, right? There are going to be things that are just like very difficult. So like maybe the next step of that question is like, what exactly would those be? Like, the easiest ones are like the psychology side of things, mm-hmm. right? Like you can't really measure that just from like an interview or a conversation with a person. And if you do, then like you're probably very well versed as like a psychologist who does that stuff, right? But like, what else other than like things that are, I guess, psychologically specific are those human elements that are really difficult to measure?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I worked on in football was like this idea of like linebacker instincts, right? So you use the tracking data, like, and we tag play action plays. So like on a play action play, how much does the linebacker bite on play action versus how on run plays, how much distance can they cover relative to the running back, and can you plot on a 2D graph that relationship? So the perfect linebacker does a really good job of scraping down and tackling running backs when it is a run. It doesn't bite when there's play action. And then there's guys where it's a competing factor. And so it's like literally outlining what that trait is. And that's maybe like, I mean, you guys have been solving these problems forever in baseball, but like that's like a problem in football where people have been like, that's hey, can I measure this guy's instincts? And it's like, I think it's interesting because as a lot of the problems that we have are projections. So a guy's a college player and you want to know how good he is in the NFL. And sometimes, when the talent disparity between a player and the rest of his opponents is so big, some of the mind stuff doesn't actually show up. And I used to always think like, well, look, if this player had this intelligence, it would show up on the film. Production is an application of traits, right? But I think when like talent level, the difference in talent level shrinks, traits change, right? Because you can't necessarily lean on the crutches that you had before, which is being more athletic than everybody else or being, having superior skills to everybody else.
Sure. Like as the game gets more advanced, so does like everything else, including like the psychology component too, right?
Right. So like the production is a great way to measure talent, but it can't be the only way because production isn't always a perfect reflection of the traits that a player has.
Okay.
Okay. Yep.
So how often does that happen that your use and the scouts use vertically degree apart for the purpose of buying the player or selling the player?
Well, I don't work for a team. We consult with all 32 teams, and like we give data and analytics to the teams. And I certainly disagree with people when I'm on consulting calls and stuff. But the biggest one is like I disagree with media members who are former players too. That's like a little. So the answer is less now because this is the work of many people, including me, but certainly not restricted to me. But I think we've done a really good job in football of getting closer, right, to a more analytical way of thinking about the game. But there's still a pretty big gap, and I would say. The gap is what makes me happy because the gap doesn't always exist because the other person's an idiot. There have been times when I'm like, oh my gosh, like I was missing this in my analysis, right? The biggest one for me is like looking at in football that you have pass rush and you have coverage, and I think that it's fairly clear that coverage is more important than pass rush, but that doesn't mean you should select coverage players versus pass rush players because it's about units versus individuals. So a pass rush is probably as good as its strongest player, whereas coverage is as good as its weakest link. So in that case, even though the unit is more important than the other, you might not want to select the top end talent because you want to basically select the weakest players back there versus the strongest players there. And that's something I think people who understood football better than I did knew that intuitively. And that was a situation where like the first blush look at the solution to that problem was probably incorrect on the analytics side. So I actually like the discrepancies because they force us to really wrestle with those differences. And oftentimes if you come at it with an open mind, you might be the one who's incorrect and you might learn from something like that.
I can't really comment on it.
Yeah, of course.
Lee,
Should we do? Yeah.
So we could do a good one. I guess we could do one of two things. We could either like break for pizza, or we could bring up Laryssa.
Yeah. Well, I think we do both, right?
Okay.
So we break it like so. If we just everybody got pizza, we all sat back down, we all restarted.
Okay. Yeah.
Does that seem fair?
Sure.
Is that cool?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
All right. Pizza break.
We have Laryssa Hedgecock here, who's a member of our. So we've been doing these for a few months now. It was Nick's like great. Nick and I used to go and have pops. I would say at the local brewery and talk football analytics or sports analytics. And he had a brilliant idea just to throw out a flyer and have people come and talk. And we've had great crowds. Some of you are here as well. Laryssa's been a part of that. She's a statistics student at Ohio State who's been working with the baseball team So there's also some connection there as well, as far as for those of you who are early on, obviously, well, most of you early on in your career as well.
Laryssa, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Laryssa Hedgecock. I'm a senior statistics major at Ohio State. I'm working with the baseball team to help them better themselves, such as with their pitching, their hitting, all that. I usually sit there and I record the game data. So even though it's not super crazy into the data, it's still amazing what you can do by just volunteering.
Very cool. So let's open. Do you want to take one from the chat? They've been so patient and loyal.
No, they're literal degenerates.
Okay.
So.
Excellent. Good to know. All right. Next question from the crowd. Yes.
I don't know how general this would be, but on like any given day, and let's say you're grading someone like Trent Williams or Quinn Nelson or something, do you have like analytics that help you with like offensive linemen, or do you have someone like, hey, I need you to watch every Quinn Nelson snap and then try to like base off their rating?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So, sorry. The question was for the chat that whether or not when we collect data, are we sort of like also doing the analytics while we're collecting the data? It's basically the question. And I know, Laryssa, you can answer this as well if you just talk about it, which is like usually what we have is like this separation of like people are collecting the data, and inputting that and putting it into a well-defined process. And that's usually like a kind of an entry-level job at a baseball team or a football group like us or a football team. And that's usually like systematic. So somebody's literally doing an entire game. So I'm charting the quarterback, I'm charting the offensive tackle. In basketball or in baseball, oftentimes that's being done by like drones, literally like tracking the players. And then that data from then is taken and analyzed by data scientists and analysts. So they're, usually what I don't want like a data collector to do the math in their head and adjust on the fly. I just want them like collecting the data for what it is. And then, folks like, us will come in and actually change based upon like, for example, it's easier to pass protect on 1st and 10 than it is on 3rd and 10 for the football fans in the room. So I don't want the grader to be like, oh, that's a win on 1st and 10, but not a win on 3rd and 10. I want them just to say that's a win or a loss, and then let me come in and adjust that with the math, because again, that's what I'm good at. I'm not good at watching football and being like, that guy's got that dog in him. That's not me, but I come in and I'll try to mathematize that. Do you guys have anything to add?
It's a lot easier to do your analytics after the game rather than during, because you're more focused on what is your player doing in that moment. And also we have the TrackMan system at Ohio State. We have one person who is on the computer recording the game and one person who is hard copying the game onto a sheet for our coaches. It's so much easier to do it after the game when we are able to sit there and upload everything, make sure everything's right. And then we can sit there and see, oh, this player has been doing this, or this player is hitting these. And we're able to actually track and identify after the game so we can get it to the coach as soon as the next day.
Would you say it's easier for like a quarterback or receiver for like watching them than someone like an offensive line physically have like a passing yard stat to go off of?
Well, in some ways I think it's actually harder because we have these anchors that we've used our entire lives, so we have like passer rating. So in some ways, like fresh eyes are almost always better than I think like having a historical thing that's wrong that we're always anchoring to. So I actually think that offensive line play, especially in the passing game, is actually like easier to measure because it's basically a bunch of one-on-one matchups and they're boxing with each other. But that's a good question. I think that that's. I think that the interesting thing is to ask that question: is are we bringing our own biases into these exercises?
We had a question from chat, and it's, how is the line between data science and data analytics in sports orgs? Or I guess just between like at PFF, is there a difference between an analyst versus a data scientist?
Yeah, so like for example, a data analytics person will oftentimes like build reports and things like that for so there's like data, and I don't know if the distinction is universal, right? Like it's probably not universal across industries, but like traditionally like data analytics is sort of like building dashboards and things like that are less predictive and more like what was or what. And then like data science is more like the so what or what if, kind of like where you're building models to try to predict things, or you're trying to build models to simulate things and things like that. So there's one is not better or worse. I think they're just a little bit different than each other.
Yeah, I'd say like the distinction that I typically see, and that I've seen both when I was not in sports and now back with the Reds, is something similar. Like you're just like, for people doing analyst role stuff, they're bringing stuff that has already been created from like our databases, and they're trying to put context or put that into a report form. Whereas more on the back end, data scientists might be generating new information, creating new metrics. And it's not necessarily like a division. It's not like black and white, like you do this bucket only and you do that bucket only. There is some fluidity. So if someone does have has the title analyst, but has predictive modeling chops or knows how to do like some sort of machine learning, they're going to get those opportunities. Like that's still a valuable skill, right? It's not like you're going to say, let's ignore these extremely valuable skills just so you can play around in Tableau or something, you know? That's like, we're going to put people who have skills, we're going to put those skills to work. So I'd say it's more of a spectrum than it is like, are you one or are you the other? I don't know. Is that how it is?
Kind of within, like, just being a stats major, sometimes we're analyzing things like using past data, and other times we're trying to predict stuff. I think they're now just trying to teach us everything they can, so that way we can go out there and just do whatever our company, our team would need.
Yeah, that's true.
We have that question back there.
Yeah, I was wondering how much and what type of mathematics would you recommend for students from high school through college to enter that field?
As much as you can. Like literally, if you're a math major, you should be taking like every course in the catalog. It's hard. Like that's my worldview as a mathematician is like as much math as you can, because I think it's always easier to sort of apply down. So like if you have this like really good math background, and then like I think most of the models in like machine learning and everything are pretty simple actually, and so that's an easier path, I think, than having like and maybe that's just, there are people maybe smarter than me who are like, they major in psychology and then they can learn machine learning when they're older. That's not me. Like I had to learn all the math first and then to learn how to apply down. So that's my worldview. I think that's a little easier. It might come at the expense of like being a better human and like taking liberal arts classes and stuff like that, frankly. But that's my opinion, and it's probably wrong. But
no, I mean, I think over time that is the right answer, right? Like you can't not stop learning math, right? Like when the next fancy modeling package comes out, the people who are going to be able to apply that package earlier are going to be the people who took more stats, more math, more STEM type courses, right? So that's not necessarily a wrong answer, but like for me, my background is like, I didn't take a lot of math. I didn't take a lot of STEM courses to get to where I was, not because I didn't want to, but because I literally was a bad student. So I was a horrible student.
But you were much better. Like you were much more well-rounded as a kid than me.
Well, yeah. I was a horrible student because I was like partying every night and like in a band. So true, yeah, I guess so.
I have no music talents. That sort of shows you the path, the different paths.
Yeah, but along that path was like, you know, I did find something I liked. In that thing that I liked also came with like, you need to know statistics. And so I learned statistics to specifically do a cognitive neuroscience work. And then when yeah, really easy. But when I went to grad school, and that became more apparent of like, you need to know not just the statistics for your own projects, but you need to be able to like read other people's stuff, like do literature review and understand why they're making the assumptions they're making. And so you end up learning math along the way, regardless of if you are directly studying it in a math class or if you have to like learn through all the peer-reviewed articles you have to read to understand what you're doing in your own domain. So I'd probably say it's like, if you start in a place where it is applied, like if you start in a place where you're applying, whether it's statistics or whatever math you have, and then from there, you end up having to learn either what you need to know or like you just genuinely grow an interest in math and learn more about all sorts of different math, then I think you get to what you're saying at the end of the day, which is you're going to learn a lot of math anyway.
Right. Yeah, you're not going to be able to avoid it. You might be able to avoid it in school, but like I think school curricula are probably better. You know, for some people, a better way to learn it than others. But there are people who can learn it by themselves. Like on the street is what I used to say. Like they learn math on the street, but like I don't. You know.
Yeah, me at like.
Yeah. But that was always something that I was not comfortable doing. And granted, I have learned a decent amount of math on my own, but like. You know, I started out math major because I always felt that was the best path.
I changed my major like 5 times. How many times did you change your major?
None.
0. Okay.
But I have. Yeah. Anyway. Good question. Yep.
I feel like it's like a little bit more applied in nature. What are your recommendations in terms of like grad school? Do you recommend it? Do you recommend looking for a job right after undergrad? Like, what are kind of your pieces of advice on that?
Go for it.
The question was, hold on, can you say the question again?
Like, do you recommend going to grad school or do you recommend looking for a job? Because this feels a little bit more skilled and applied in nature, so like grad school is something
Okay. I see. So when you're getting into sports analytics, like after undergrad, do you go into sports analytics for a career, or are you better off going to grad school? I mean, luckily, at least in our sport, like you kind of do both. Like it's not impossible to do both. Like Laryssa is a good example of someone who gets both, right? Like she's a student and she's also working with her team. There's also internships, right? So a lot of the time people will take a summer and sometimes they'll even take a semester to go work for a team and offset their graduation simply to get even more experience with whether it's an organization or a place like PFF. And then on top of that, it's like people who do go to grad school, you still have people who are doing that kind of stuff too. Like at the Reds, we've taken in a few different graduate students who did internships with us. Like there was even a person, like in my first or second year I was working there was someone who was like going to law school and they did like a internship with us for one summer. So you don't necessarily have to like, again, it doesn't have to be black and white. But if you are talking about like just starting your career as opposed to like doing more school and having to like balance an internship with your graduate work, then it's more like, really it's up to you at that point. Like if you feel like you're prepared to go jump into the full-time world, then.
Have you ever hired or not hired somebody because of the degree that they had?
Oh no, like the degree is usually like one of the last things I look at because they have to take the technical assessment first. So typically when you're applying to the Reds, like particularly in my department for baseball analytics, you have to take essentially a quiz that says you know how to code. So we test you on like writing functions and doing database queries. And if you could pass that test, then you could do like the minimum amount required, which is like read code, review code, and write your own code. Then from there, it's like specialized questions like can you predict home runs, or can you predict the distance of something or whatever? And then we kind of pick through the best answers there. But all of that stuff doesn't require like you telling me what your degree is. I look at the resumes and that stuff after all the technical interview, because that's what matters at the end, right? Like, can you code? Do you make good assumptions in terms of like research methods?
Yeah, so that gets back to your question, which is like, you need to know this stuff, but like, there are also people, like this is a competitive enough field where people, like you're gonna have to demonstrate to people that you know this stuff somewhere, right? So like, I don't know, like I've had 9 interns now at BFF. I usually take about 3 every summer. And for me, it's almost always like, has this person like produced something on their own blog? Or does this person tweet it? Like, does this person like take publicly available data, do some cool stuff with it, tweet it out? Do they email? I get email like tons of emails every single day, and usually I'll it's kind of cool. Like I'll go to the website and be like, oh, this person's doing some fun stuff, and that's an application of all of the degree, right, or the lack of a degree. But ultimately, like that piece of paper, it matters certainly, and I think like. For a lot of people, you're getting what you pay for when you get a degree. But in sports, it's different than like, when you want to become a professor, you got to get a PhD in that department, right? Then you have to get a postdoc, and then you have to do this, and this. Well, it depends on the yeah. Like. And so that was tried and true, whereas like this, we're still growing as an industry, right? So people, like, we're starting to get sports analytics programs, we're starting to get sports business programs, we're starting to do these things, and that's fantastic. And that's going to do a good job of like, for students who don't have great mentorship, they're going to be able to have tried and true paths to get to that career. Everybody else, I always say, you have to seek out mentorship, right? So like, I've had 9 interns, 2 of them are in the NFL right now in terms of their quantitative analysts in the league, right? And those are people, I honest to goodness do not know what my old intern, I do not know what his degree is in. But he's now a Denver Broncos quantitative analyst. I honestly don't know, like my good friend even. Like I'm actually friends with him, and he works with the Eagles. I have no idea what he got at Wharton. I have no idea what his degree was in. But he came to me and said, hey, here's some of my work. I'm like, yeah, I want to work with this person for the summer. And like, that's kind of how it goes. And so I guess the answer is yes to everything, but nothing was required, I guess is the answer.
Yeah, it still is like the Wild West in a way.
Like if you go for internships and you don't get any and you want to be in that field, then I would say level up and get a degree, like an extra degree, like a master's or something like that. But you by no means need one, I think, to get to where we are, or where the people that work for us are, or anywhere else in the sports industry.
There's not a lot of GMs that have PhDs.
No,
that's the other way to think about it.
That's why I'm not one yet. That's what holding me back.
Yeah, that's it.
So, what's like the sports left, or like the hardest sports to apply analytics to?
All right. What are the hardest sports to apply analytics to? The ones with no data. Those are the hardest ones, right? Like even with like when I was doing pro bull rating stats, like, by the way, shout out to Slade Law and pro bull rating. When I was doing pro bull ratings, like predictive analytics, they still have data on like whether or not a writer made 8s, like whether a bull writes counterclockwise or clockwise, handedness of a right. Did you know? Little shout out to some pro bull rating facts, y'all. If you're left-handed, you actually had an advantage in pro bull writing because most bulls wrote counterclockwise. Like these are like just random analytics that they have, right? But to be able to like predict who was going to make 8s and then predict like their score at the end of the day, like they still had 20 years of judging data for us to make analytical models with, right? So wherever there's data, there's analytics. And so the hardest sports to do analytics around are the ones that have little to no data.
So that's that with a sport like WWE, really hard to clearly stop.
Would a sport like WWE be yeah, I feel like between like it being also scripted, then yeah, I feel like the best data would be like Stephanie McMahon's script logs.
But to come back to this though, like when there was the sports betting scandal with Tadani in the NBA, right? So that like 15 years ago or something, there was a scandal where a referee was rigging games to win. And it's not like a $400,000 salary to rig games for 2K each, kind of sounds stupid, but he was doing it anyway. And what they found was inconsistencies in the data. So sports bettors were finding the play-by-play data that they were using to make their wagers having inconsistencies. And so even like the funniest thing what you're saying is that this thing's rigged, but like even the riggedness is found in the data when people try to be below board.
Sure. Yeah.
It was mainly because when Cincinnati rigged the game, he went all out to the game, just gave out all the free throws to everyone.
There's a documentary on Netflix about that just came out.
Yeah.
So,
It was the same one.
something to watch.
It was the same people who did the Manti Te'o documentary.
Always like the untold story that they started last summer.
Yeah.
They're back now.
Good question.
Quick question, just kind of piggybacking on what you said in reference to inconsistency. Can you speak on, I guess, the value and importance of in athletics when you're teaching the like consistency is the thing, show up every day, right? Or shoot yourself out of a slump. Consistency versus the trend, like can be a bit of a predictive model, like, right? So you have trends that suggest that, okay, this is what they're probably going to do, but if there has some inconsistencies, I guess, like which way would you go? Would you go off the highlight of an inconsistency, or he can do this, hasn't shown it, or would you go with the fact that the trend says 9 times out of 10, he or she is not going to show it?
Yeah, so the question is when you're trying to talk to a player, I guess specifically, like would you rather like inform them about their prediction, or would you rather inform them about what you're saying, inconsistency of maybe that prediction or maybe their performance? So at least from like the analytics point of view, like we can talk about inconsistencies in terms of variability. And so when we talk about variability, if we're talking about someone with high variability, then that becomes really hard to say, like, if this person is really high variance, then we really don't know what the best answer is going to be, because it could be the average, or it could be really low or really high in terms of whatever the guess might be. If someone has low variability, then it does become easier. Then you can kind of say, well, since the variability of our predictions are pretty low for this particular player, then the prediction is probably going to win out more often. But if you have players with high variability, particularly like rookies, like they have like really high variability, anyone coming from like a collegiate system who was only there for like a minimum amount of time, anyone coming from an amateur system, like in baseball, we draft players in high school, or draft players out of the DR or sign players out of the DR who like have almost no data on them. It's just like a few scouting reports, right? So that is really high variability. And so like, how do we incorporate that information into telling a player whether they're on the right track or not? That is the job. It's how close can we get, and then how can we do just right by the player development system, right? Like player development in a way from the analytics point of view is like, if we could take your high variance and narrow that down because they're doing all the things right, skills, all the drills, training them up into being more of a precise player, all of that should reduce that variance. And then over time, if you reduce your variance, then your projectability is easier in terms of accuracy. And then we could then say we're on the right track with someone. But it does require like that player development at the beginning to reduce that variance. So we gotta make that inconsistency consistent. So
do you note that? So like, I figure you being great, like, okay, we're bringing you in to be accurate. But when you don't have the ability to really project it, that's something that you note in your proposals?
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a risk, right? Like it's, when we talk about inconsistency or we talk about variability, we're also talking about risk, right? Like someone could be like MVP statistics, but their variability could be so high that they could also like be out of the game the next year, right? So that's a really big risk. Whereas someone who's a lower ceiling, but like this is going to be an average player, less risky, but you know what you're getting, right? There's a question for you, Laryssa.
Oh,
apparently.
really?
Yeah, it says, have you found collecting your own data has a special benefit as opposed to just passive or third-party data collection?
I think that sometimes depends. Like, we use the TrackMan system at Ohio State, and I personally sit there and I take sometimes multiple games and I combine them together to be able to sit there and with our players be able to track like what sequences they can hit, which ones they can't hit, how we can hopefully improve them. We would then have to talk about which data we actually need to throw out versus what we need to keep in, because sometimes they hit like 4 foul balls in a row and then all of a sudden they get walked. And do we keep that? Do we not keep that? So taking your own data versus getting from a third party is variable because of like, sometimes you will see something that the third party doesn't. Sometimes the third party will see something that you don't. And it kind of depends on who's your third party or what data do you do. Like, I personally right now cannot recognize when our pitcher pitches which exact pitch that is. But our system can do that. But one of the other guys who works with me, he's literally sitting and going, that's a curveball, that's a slider, that's a fast, immediately, because he's had years of experience. So it kind of just depends on your experience, what data you're looking at, because I look at some of this data and I'm like, okay, so we should look at this, this, and this, and the baseball guys are like, well, we just need this, this, and this, and I'm like, but we can do more with the other pieces. We can expand upon, we can sit there and like, I want to create a program where it tells us our averages for our pitchers. So that way, if they get injured, we can actually sit there and give this information over to our trainers. So that way they know where our pitchers' averages are, so we can help bring them back up to it. Does that answer the question?
I'm sure.
I think that's good. I would say the other thing that's very interesting is like, we haven't talked about this role yet, and we personally at PFF don't have this. We're kind of like, a lot of people do it, but there's an issue. Data integrity is like a humongous problem, right? And like, I know like if you're an outside vendor like PFF is, like you have to go through painstaking hours to earn the trust of an internal group. If you're on a team and you propose a new data collection process, you're going to have to go through painstaking hours to talk about how, the integrity of that process. And there's a number of different ways to do that. Data engineer is a job that pays extremely well, is extremely important, and is like right now, like I think that's the one that's in the highest demand, right? It's going to be in the highest demand because we're going to be inundated with third-party vendors in pro sports, or you guys already are in baseball, but football especially, and somebody who's able to get the data onto the tip of the spear for the analysts is extremely valuable, because the worst thing that you can do in any field, but especially if you're coming from the outside, which math is frankly on the outside of sports, is to give them misleading information. So like, I think that is a great example. It's one of the true problems that we have.
To that point, how do y'all evaluate models to know which one is good, which one isn't, and to kind of stop people from playing around with numbers to get it to say what they want to say as opposed to what it actually is?
I mean, it has to have some long-term validity against markets somehow. Like whether that is, hey, look here, I published my draft model every single year, and look, it ranks the quarterbacks fairly well. Look, we use these in a betting model and it makes money over time, type of thing. Like that's a big reason, because when you look at like log loss or R squared or whatever, like a coach doesn't care about what your R squared is or what your log loss is on a model. So it either has to, you have to communicate the results in a way that are plausible, and you also have to show its added value too, because there are some things where the effect size is just nothing, right? So you build this big model, and it like, okay, this changes how many players I would have picked differently this year, 1, 2 in a baseball draft. That's that certainly matters, but it's not that much.
Also, sometimes they have to be repeatable. Like with scientific data, you have to be able to repeat the experiment over and over again. Because if you can hand it off to someone else and they can repeat it and get a very extremely close number because of seed data, that actually helps you prove, yes, this is good versus no, it's not. Because if you manipulate certain things, all of a sudden you're like, well, it looks great, and then someone else runs it and it's not.
So you guys at Pro Football Focus, you guys are doing a soccer one now, right? It's called PFF.
FC, my backpack right here. Me, big time soccer guy.
I am too. That's why I asked. So is that ran by the same people that are doing Pro Football Focus? And do you guys think that you'll ever branch off into more sports? Like, are you going to do baseball or basketball or hockey eventually?
So the answer to the first question is no. Like, we have a different business unit that does soccer. A lot of the same principles are applied, like the data collection, the grading, all that stuff. Like, it's kind of adapted, but we made so many, we were talking about, you were on the Raiders. We made so many mistakes throughout the years. Sorry, I gotta answer the question, or restate the question for the chat. Is PFF doing soccer, and are they, is it the same people that are doing PFF football? So we in football, American football, made a lot of mistakes that when we started soccer, I made sure I was like, we cannot make the same mistakes in world football than we made in American football. So it's a different process. We did a lot of, in our American football product, we basically let Jesus take the wheel on the data collection, that it was actually going to yield valuable information. We got lucky that it did. For soccer, we were very design focused on how we collected soccer data, making sure that data was something that was adding to the market. So we weren't just collecting the same stuff that StatsBomb was collecting or another soccer vendor was, and that stuff actually had value over time. So before we even decided to fully launch soccer, we put together processes and made sure that those things mapped to wins and those things were stable. So Nick was talking about how when you're talking to players, you have sets of stats that are like noise and signal. So if for us, it's like, and I own American football, if a quarterback throws an interception, that could happen in a multitude of ways. I don't want to chew a quarterback out if he throws an interception that was off his wide receiver's hands. That has nothing to do with his ability. I want to chew out a quarterback if he's throwing the ball to the free safety 6 times and the free safety drops it all 6 times, right? Because that's the part of the process. You want to be able to do that in every sport. To answer the last question, I'm not sure. I think that other sports, basketball and baseball, as far as the data collection process is concerned, especially on-field stuff, there's a lot of people doing that right now. And I don't know necessarily if there's a ton of value in adding to that, but I do think from a content and analysis and space, there's probably value in getting into those.
All the way in the back there.
So it's basically for the floor, but a lot of basically publicly operated sports organizations that basically collect publicly available data and try to do analysis on them have created some metrics like EPA, or to some variation. How much of those aggregations and those analytics influence what you do with your organization or with your own personal life when you do analysis outside your organization?
The question's is work in the public domain, places that create their own advanced metrics like EPA or WAR, how much does that influence what we do? Shout out to Ben Baldwin. That's my dude. It's the eye in the sky. For me, like, I guess personally, it does a lot. Like, I wouldn't necessarily consider myself a contributor to NFL Fast Star or any of the NFL stuff out there, but I do get into conversations with Ben. I get into conversations with Mike Lopez over at the league, just about different things that we could be doing analytically, whether it's how we're setting up a big data bowl question or how a particular model is being tuned. So like their considerations are also interesting to me because really we're all using the same tools at the end of the day. Like if you're familiar with XGBoost, a lot of people are using XGBoost everywhere. And then if you're not using XGBoost, you're using like one of like Light GBM or Cat Boost. And so it's just different flavors of the same modeling types. And it's not like there's a secret one that the Reds have that's like proprietary to us and we've reinvented statistics or something. That doesn't necessarily exist. So like there are some ideas that come from the public sphere that are interesting and should be looked at a little more. But at the same time, as we're talking about it, it's not like a lot of these places that are public or open are necessarily getting a lot of money for what they do. Like Ben, I think he has like a buy me coffee link, and then like he asks people to like buy him coffee or something, and it's like he shuts that link down once he makes enough to like support the rest of his website. So at the hobbyist level, which is what we're talking about, like you don't necessarily make enough money and therefore you're not going to spend that much of your like life doing it. Whereas someone like me or Eric, we get paid to do it for as many hours a day. We're told to sit at our computer. So we get a lot more hours to make the models better, right? So it's not just one model from the public that's really good, but it's what can we do to make that model even more accurate or even more precise? And we have the availability in terms of hours to do that. So for any one team or organization, like you're more likely going to have more accurate models that are proprietary simply because you have a lot more people dedicating a lot more time. So even though you do get inspiration publicly, you hope that you could beat that public value simply because you have more time to spend on it.
Yeah, I would say the biggest mistake that we initially made at PFF, and this is, I think, predated me, but it was something that when I didn't have necessarily power, I was sort of told to me. The biggest mistake we made at the beginning was pretending that other vendors didn't exist, right? And I think the biggest mistake that other vendors made was pretending we didn't exist. And the more that I talk to teams and everything, like they do, like there is a big time folding in of either publicly available stuff or just the ideas from it. So, there might be a model that's made in the public sphere that doesn't have the available data isn't necessarily as good, but you can apply the same principles to the available data that you have, right? So then that to me is like maybe where the inspiration is. It's not necessarily that like, I'm going to take the numbers that come from the EPA that's on NFL FastStar and I'm going to use them, but I might take the modeling technique and apply it to our data that has maybe a couple extra features added to it that are only available to us. And that I do know happens. And I think that it's obviously a great thing. I mean, the best statistical models are an ensemble of a bunch of weaker statistical models, right? And that bubbles up, to most things.
I think we probably have time for like one
or two more.
Yeah.
So for example, in an organization, there are some like cross-functional operations where, let's say, like marketing can work with operations, sales can work with operations and stuff like that. Would you say that analytics is kind of like an independent function within that sports organization, or you guys see yourself interacting with other functions as well in the daily routine?
Good question.
Yeah, so the question is there crossover between departments when you work in analytics? So like marketing might work with sales, but does analytics have involvement with, say, marketing or sales at a team? Who was the Jags guy who just left?
Yeah, Moment Gafar.
Yeah, he was doing like both.
He was doing both, yeah.
Right? Yeah, so there is like precedence for like people, at least in the NFL, and I know some people in the NHL who have crossover between like their player operations and then their business operations counterpart. I know that almost all baseball teams, I would assume, there is complete division. So as you work in baseball, you don't do anything related to like tickets or season ticket holders or authentics or business or marketing. All of that's handled by the business team and marketing team. And that's pretty much at every org, minus like maybe one or two. But that's also because baseball, in terms of analytics, has just grown so large that you can't have someone also do both. Like there's so much data in baseball now that you have to dedicate like gigantic teams to looking through all that data and analyzing it. So I don't know if you would necessarily call it a luxury, but like baseball doesn't have that luxury to kind of split their time between baseball and also business. But
yeah, I mean, like if you're so I think it depends upon how advanced the league is. So like if you're thinking about like the MLS, for example, Major League Soccer, we're not talking about really rich organizations, right? So they're not necessarily going to be able to afford the huge, staffs, right? So you might, if you're somebody who wants to, or is versatile and wants to work across different functions, then you can't, like, that's a place for to go. If you want to be like a versatile polymath on a baseball team, time has probably passed you by there, unless you want to work, maybe like overseas somewhere. I don't know, like football is kind of like, I do know somebody who is I think, director of analytics, but also a pro scout on an NFL team. Like, so you can, I think it depends. You have to find the sport that is at the right time in their maturity to do that. But those certainly exist. And there are people, like, I generally think of myself more as like a generalist. Like, I like do a lot of stuff. I think if I only had one job if I only could do the draft model, I don't know if I would enjoy myself as much, because I just like to have my hands in all kinds of different projects. So I might not be a good person to work for a baseball team, because they're much more specialized. And like, you have to, if you're thinking about your career, you sort of have to think about how, it's going to be for you, because that's going to probably determine where you end up going. Like for a college, so for example, like in college football and in college baseball, like you have to be a sort of a person who does a lot of stuff for your organization.
Because like, I know we have we're all one organization, or the one thing, and some of the kids do like the scouting reports. Some of them do the like I do the baseball games, and I've started to try and get myself more out there, creating my own programs, so that way our baseball team can actually use them. Like, kind of going back to like the sharing data. Last time we had one of these, I actually got an idea from one of the young men that had come in on sequencing the pitches for our baseball players, so that way that we know we need to work on like these sequences versus these ones. And I was able to create that, and we haven't presented it to our coach yet, but we're hoping to get to soon. So it is one of those things.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more.
Okay. Cool.
So for a lot of us, like first and second year students that are, just starting college and getting our foot in the door with like sport analytics and the sport administration, what do you say is the biggest advice you can give us for those that want to work in like a professional front office, especially within like data analytics and all of that, the economic side of it, how that ties together? So what would you say is the biggest advice with what we can do in school that can eventually help us get our dream careers in the sport industry?
So the question was like, what is the number one? What's the biggest advice for young students, early career students, but probably applies to everybody, to get into sports and the business side? I am, the pandemic was interesting because I ended up giving a lot of these like talks at these schools because I didn't have to fly in, so I would just Zoom in. And I had a bullet point was like unsolicited advice, and it was always, I have already said this, but learn as much math as you can. Like learn as much math as good for your mental health, basically. Read a lot and communicate a lot. So I think the biggest thing, and again, this is, you only get one shot at this, right? Like you only get one, set of 4 years to go to college. For most, some of us became super seniors and went for longer than that. But like, take advantage, like talk, like, ask your professors questions, right? Like, mock ideas with them, right? Like go and ask them like, hey, I think that the Bengals should really have considered re-signing Jesse Bates for this amount of money. Like, what do you think? What is the economics of it? And like, talk through, your ideas, because over time that's going to expose the weaknesses in your ideas and make you go back and make them better. It's going to make you a better communicator. It's going to give you more confidence because, honestly, the big thing is like, you have to go to the GM and say, hey, pound the table for a player. Like if you don't have experience, like getting, talking to people that are more senior than you, or who you may think like, hey, I don't want to talk to that guy because I think he might think I'm an idiot. It's like, well, that's going to happen at some point in your life, and this is a very cool sandbox to do it in a low stakes environment. So to me, it's math and communication. That's the big thing. Like learn how to communicate in the written word, and learn how to communicate through discussing your ideas with your peers and people that you may think of as more senior than you.
I would go for it. You want to go for it?
Sure. All right. If you see if your school has your Sports Analytic Association, that's a great way to start. Actually ask some of your teachers like, hey, I know because some of our teachers, they're more specialized in the microstats or biology stats. Ask if anyone has an interest within the sports stats. Volunteer. I actually got my baseball position because it was placed on the sports analytics group chat, and they were asking like, hey, can someone come do this? And I responded. They actually said, oh, sorry, we have someone else who was doing it. And then the next day, Dr. Ruddy literally texted me saying, hey, can you make it? And that's how I was able to get my position. Come down to events like this. Get to know people. This is how you get your foot in the door. Practice mock interviews. Helps a lot. Helps you remain calm while doing an interview, all that stuff. Like you were saying, Eric, lots of math classes, lots of stat classes. Start figuring out how you can use those stat classes to apply to your data. Sometimes take classes on R, Python, SAS.
Maybe not SAS.
Well, I'm taking one now, and it's like, how do I use this for this?
Yeah.
Follow people on Twitter. Actually,
one of my colleagues, Dave Sulfaro, back there, like he's in a different field as me at PFF, but applied a lot of the same stuff. Like Dave's famous for saying, well, other kids were at class. I was at the football field, like, helping out, the football team and stuff like that. I second, what Laryssa said, which is, again, like just ask. Like the worst thing they can say to you is we have nothing for you. And then you got to build it yourself. And a lot of times, these things are like about building your, data science 15 years ago wasn't a field, right? Like there's a lot of you are going to be in fields in 10 years that right now do not have a name. Some of you are going to be tasked with creating those things. And so, at first ask, be relentless in asking, be okay with rejection. And if somebody says, hey, sure, you can help me with this, do this. And it's like, then you get your foot in the door, and then you can make of it whatever you want to make of it. And I think that's a big part too.
Like, I guess two things. One, when you were just saying like, it reminded me of the meme of like, well, you were at a party, I was studying the blade.
Well, yeah. I mean, you guys are all here on a Friday night instead of going out and getting drunk, so good for you.
I'm about to.
You're already on the right track. So, but
I would say say, at least from the Reds' perspective and my perspective, the two things you could do, especially if you're looking at analytics jobs, and this still applies to baseball operations or ops jobs that are not necessarily analytics focused, but you want to do public work, right? So if you even have a project that has a replication of something, like whether it's pitch sequencing, or if you recreate your own stuff model, or if you do some sort of fielder positioning, or you have some sort of, new way to quantify something, just putting that out there publicly, it's a good talking point when you go into your interviews, or you put that on your resume, and like someone who's looking at resumes will see that you did a project in the public. They could go to that project directly, read about it, and then see how deep or serious you are. So public work is really important, and like there's no better like bar of that than the big data bowl right now. Just publicly, the amount of people who are contributing to it, and then for all the people who are not just the finalists but honorable mentions, like.
I read every single solution to the Big Data Bowl, and that's where for those who don't know, the NFL puts on what's called the Big Data Bowl, which is a data analytics competition where the league releases data, and it's kind of a hackathon. It goes on for a certain amount of time, and like there is an incredible amount of what I would consider courage in putting your work out there and having it judged by professionals and judged by the world. Like it is. Like I often, when I produce something new, I get nervous, right? Like and so when I'm hiring people, I look there because there's a level of not only obviously the aptitude it takes to produce good work there, but there's also the courage of being able to put yourself out there for scrutiny that I think is extremely endearing as somebody who hires people in that area.
Yeah, and it's not just football. Like you'll have winners who've gone on to other sports. Like Danny is a great example over at Seattle Kraken, who his team won the Big Data Bowl. He ended up working as one of the first analysts at Seattle Kraken. So you have a lot of this is just really not a shout out to Mike Lopez and the Big Data Bowl, but more of a shout out to public work. So everyone who participated in that competition had their work highlighted and had their work seen by not just NFL teams, but NFL related organizations, and just like all baseball teams would look at those competitors as well. So public work, in my opinion, is like, it's not a back door, but it definitely opens the front door a lot more. And then the second thing, which is Laryssa said, like networking, I hate the word, but it's like making friends in sports industry, right? Like if, the world collapses and I'm no longer with the Reds, like I feel pretty comfortable calling Eric up and seeing what's around, just because me and him go out for beers and it's fun.
Yeah.
But that's networking, right? Like if you have like everyone in this room, it would be a travesty if like you don't meet someone just as friends, and as you go through your sports analytics or sports career journey, like you have a group, right? Like this is a gigantic group. A lot of you are going to be interns for teams. A lot of you are going to intern for your team, whether it's at a college or at the next college you go to or wherever. Like a lot of you are going to try to make your way into sports, and having connections with people, it really opens up that network, right? And especially if you're comfortable with like getting a lunch or getting a beer with a person, like it really helps open those doors. Like again, for me, I could always ask Eric, and like Laryssa can always ask me or Eric for whatever. And
if I didn't have a job at the time, I could find somebody who did, right? And like and there's certainly a looking out. And the cool thing, and like this is a competitive thing. A lot of us are competitors at heart. But sports are growing. Like I said the other day, like there might be not as much growth in data science positions, but there's growth in data engineer positions now. There's X, Y, and Z. But like if you have a good network, you're not going to be that far from having getting a job if you end up needing one, or if you're unhappy, like there's plenty of people that'll message me and be like, hey, what's PFF got? Like we just hired 2 people from NFL teams that were like, it just wasn't working out for them, so then they came and worked for us. Like that's kind of what you want, right? This is a place where we want people to be happy. The reason you guys are here is because in a lot of cases is because you love sports, and you think about, okay, if I can get a job in sports, I can be happy. Like that's the humanistic part of what we're doing, right? Is trying to make sure that people have fulfilled careers. So
I think we're running up on time here, so but yeah, thanks to Wayne. Appreciate you inviting us.
Cool. So just to close out, we'll give them a quick round of applause.